Welcome to the Waiting Room Revolution. We're so excited to announce our book, Hope for the Best, Plan for the Rest 7 Keys for Navigating a Life Changing Diagnosis, is available now in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Get a copy wherever you buy your books, and check out our website, waitingroomrevolution.com, for more information.
I can't live with the idea of just letting a bad thing happen and then that's
Mhm,
it, right? Like
mhm,
I feel like it helps me move forward if I take the
mhm,
bad thing that
mhm,
happened and turn it into good. Kind of in the
mhm,
same way that humor allows you to take back a piece of control over the
mhm,
situation. I think advocacy
mhm.
does the same.
That was Kristen Flannery, aka Lady Glaucomflecken on social media, and co host of the podcast Knock Knock Hi. She advocates for caregivers and co-survivors of medical trauma, such as critical illness and cardiac arrest, and patient caregiver-centered care. We discuss the story behind the Glaucomflecken name, the motivation behind her advocacy, and some of her exciting projects to make change. Hi, I'm Xian Xiao.
And I'm Sammy Winemaker. We talk to people who have information and tips on how to unlock a better illness experience.
The Waiting Room Revolution starts right now. Hi, Lady Glaucomflecken. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, nice to meet you guys. I've admired your work from afar.
It's so amazing that
thanks.
you are agreeable to be on our podcast.
Oh, I'm happy to be on it. I love what you guys are doing. And, a lot of your mission aligns really, there's a lot of overlap with my mission too. So I'm really happy to
So
be here.
maybe the audience would know you as Lady Glaucomflecken,
Yes.
but your real name is Kristen Flannery.
Mhm.
And we'd love to, maybe we could start with, who is Lady Glaucomflecken and how did you develop this social media persona?
Yeah. Well, it started because my husband, Will, is known very well on social media within the medical community as Dr. Glaucomflecken and likes to fancy himself a comedian. And he was on Twitter all the time. This was several years ago. And he would be sitting in the corner looking at his phone and just giggling, and eventually I was like, what is so funny all the time over there? And so he told me about Med Twitter and, then I started kind of hearing about some names here and there. Like I started to become familiar and eventually it just got to be like, well, if we're going to hang out at all, I think I have to be on Twitter because that's where you're spending all your time. So, I developed a persona of Lady Glaucomflecken, and just stole all his friends basically, and then would go on and roast him, give him, I don't know, insult him or tease him or whatever, with whatever he was doing. And so, it just kind of started as that's sort of our attachment style to make fun of each
I love
other,
it.
or,
Mhm.
at least me make fun of him. So we just it was a way to just hang out together. We have kids and jobs and a busy life. And so we don't get out much. So that was something that we could do together that didn't involve any of the other stuff. So, yeah, that's how it started. And then, just has kind of taken off from there with all of the, events of the last few years, professionally, but also in our lives. So
Mhm.
yeah, now it's growing and growing. Now I do it full time.
Did you
Amazing.
did you ever think, honestly, did you think
No,
that it would ever grow into like this kind of personality? And where did
no.
Glaucomflecken come from?
Yeah, we get that a lot. That is a real word in
Mhm,
ophthalmology because my husband's an ophthalmologist. He started his Dr. Glaucomflecken character, writing for Gomer Blog, which I don't know,
mhm,
maybe you remember, but it was kind of
mhm,
like The Onion, but for medical professionals.
mhm,
And they all used pseudonyms. No one used their real names. And
mhm,
so he had to come up with a pseudonym, and he was at a research conference one day during residency, and he is
mhm,
not a researcher by any stretch of the imagination. He finds it so boring. And so he was
mhm.
trying to entertain himself, and he got on Twitter as Dr. Glaucomflecken and started making jokes because he said it was the funniest word in ophthalmology that he could think of. He was trying to find the funniest
Yeah.
one. And so he just landed on that. But yeah, if we had known that it would get big like this, we probably would have chosen something different. But here we are. It's memorable, at least.
Exactly.
sure.
There's no confusion. Well, we're so excited to have you on the show because you actually, on your Twitter, and a lot of the stuff you advocate for is about your experiences as a caregiver. And I think on, you can see this on the website, but you talked about how your husband suffered different cancer occurrences and then also had a cardiac arrest at the age of 35. So that's really a lot for a young couple to handle. And I know
Yeah.
you had kids at that time. So we'd love to, if you're open to sharing, talk a little bit about how that kind of changed your perspective and what it's like being, having gone through that.
Yeah. So when we were in our mid 20s, he was in medical school. I had just graduated from my graduate school program. We decided, there were a couple of years where I finished, but he wasn't finished yet. And we lived in the middle of nowhere. And, it just kind of was a weird time. So we thought, well, let's just use this time where, my career's a little bit on hold right now anyway, waiting for him to graduate. So we'll just, start our family because we knew we wanted to do that sometime. Seemed like as good a time as any, despite being in med school. And so we went ahead and did. We had our first daughter. And when she was about a year old and he was still in med school, he was diagnosed with testicular cancer. And luckily he found it really early. And all it required was surgery. He didn't need radiation or chemo or anything. He just had an orchiectomy. And they told us, you can pretty much go on with life as normal. You can get by with just one testicle. You may experience a few things, but just keep an eye out and let us know, and so we just kind of moved on, forgot about it eventually. But, it does, I'll back up before we moved on. It does change your perspective when in your mid 20s, when you're supposed to be your strongest, your healthiest, just prime of your life, and you have this feeling of invincibility and possibility. The whole future is ahead of you and you have agency within it. That's kind of the theme of the 20s. When instead you're a cancer patient, it's a real shift in your identity, and it's really hard to wrap your mind and your emotions around all of that. And, on my side of it, it was, even though we know it's a, quote unquote, good cancer, which I hate that term. There's no good cancer, but it's a treatable cancer. You still wonder, well, if this happened, what else could happen? And what if it's, spread and we didn't catch it at first? And, what if I'm left to raise this child alone? Just all these things that are suddenly your future is a lot more uncertain than you felt like it was. But yes, we moved on from that, went to residency. I started my career in the town where he was in residency. We had our second child. And then when that child was about a year old, he got testicular cancer again. So it wasn't, the question we get all the time from doctors is, was it, in response to treatment from the first one? No, he had only had surgery. He was just that lucky that of the already smaller percentage of people that get testicular cancer, about 1% of those go on to get testicular cancer in the second testicle. And he was just one of those unlucky few. So that one was harder because, it comes with all the same psychological baggage around having another cancer diagnosis. But also it meant, infertility this time because it was a second orchiectomy. It meant he had to go on hormone therapy for the rest of his life. And that is no walk in the park. I mean, here we are, gosh, that baby is now 8.5 years old and we still haven't got it exactly right. We're still tweaking, and that it comes with a whole host of issues that don't get talked about nearly enough, but that's another podcast. And it just was like, now it was affecting our life and our future and the choices that we were able to make. In addition to still being we still had not made it out of our 20s yet, and so 2 cancer diagnoses before you're 30 is a lot to deal with. And then 4 years after that is when he had his cardiac arrest. So it was cancer, 3 years, cancer, 4 years, cardiac arrest. So by the time he was 34 years old, he had all of that happen to his body. So, I don't know. I feel like we aged quickly.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
went through a lot. All the while raising 2 small kids and getting our own careers off the grounds, and
Mhm.
it's a weird juxtaposition, because you go in these
Mhm.
waiting rooms and you see people that are 2, 3, 4 times your age. And
Mhm.
you get the brochures with the information about your disease or your condition. And
Mhm.
they are full of 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds. And
Mhm.
there's just thing after thing, little micro things,
Mhm.
that add up that tell you this shouldn't be happening to you.
Mhm.
You're so unlucky because this shouldn't be
Mhm.
happening to you. And it also makes it where you don't feel seen or understood because it's like all these materials that are made to help you as a patient, or if you're lucky, as a family member.
Mhm.
Um, are not designed for you in your stage of life.
Mhm.
There's nothing in there about how to talk to your kids about
Mhm.
these diseases. There's
Mhm.
nothing in there about, considering fertility or whatever. I mean, for testicular cancer, there is, but, there's all
Mhm.
these issues that come along that might vary by stage of life, and
Mhm.
often with adolescents and young adults, their stage of life isn't considered in those
Mhm.
materials. And it's really kind of just further, it's like adding insult to injury, it's further isolating, and it's hard to feel like it's hard to normalize anything when that's the case.
It, it's an unbelievable story. I mean, for sure. Um,
Yeah, if it were a movie script, it'd be like 2 on the nose and they would make you go back and rewrite it. Yeah.
yeah, gosh, I want to ask you so many things. Did you feel like you were in the shadows of each of those major, illnesses, first testicular cancer, second one, and then the cardiac arrest? I mean, the patient often gets the spotlight, and it is so scary, but, you're right there. You're right there.
Yeah, that is one of my, main messages since all of this, is that this all happened to me too. I mean, it didn't happen in my body. The disease itself
Mhm.
was not in my body, but it happened to my mind and body as well.
Mhm.
Um, so with the cancer, I remember just hardly even being looked at by the
Mhm.
doctors, like, in conversation, like I'm in the room as well. And
Mhm.
they're telling us about the diagnosis and telling us about the treatment plan and telling us all these things.
Mhm.
And they're talking to him. They're looking at him, talking to him.
Mhm.
They're asking him if he has any questions. And nobody's being mean. Nobody's,
No.
trying to exclude.
Mhm.
It's just people don't think about it.
Mhm.
They think of the family member as like, well, that person is there for the patient. The patient is here for me, right? Like I'm here to
Yeah.
talk to the patient, and then the patient can talk to the family member if they need additional support or whatever, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
which is true, but that person is many things. That person is a support person to the patient. And also, this disease is happening. If they're there with that patient, they're very close to the patient. So this
Mhm.
disease is happening in their life as well. And it's
Yeah.
affecting their life as well.
Yeah.
And in the case of a marriage, I mean, or like a parent child, intimately
Mhm.
connected,
Mhm.
and affecting their life in much the same way as the patient. And yeah, it very much was I won't say ignored, but I will say overlooked. No
Yeah.
one really thought about my role and why I might be there, what questions I might have, how I might
Mhm.
be feeling about it.
Mhm. Um, it's almost like, wasn't it nice of you to drive the patient here
Yeah.
today?
Right.
And
Yeah. So there's
yeah.
worst case scenario is kind of that, right? You
Mhm.
either just are not acknowledged at all, or you're just considered to be only a support person for the patient.
Mhm.
A little bit better is to say, oh, well, caregivers are a valued part of our care team.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
something at least, and is
Mhm.
true. And also, that still leaves something out, which is this is a co-patient.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
is
we call
somebody
it a
who
yeah.
is
Yeah.
affected just as intensely. If the details might look different, but they're affected
Yeah.
very much as well.
Yeah, I think we call it like they go on a parallel illness journey. I think you
Yeah.
call it like they're like a co-survivor, right? I think you called yourself that. It is a co-patient,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like they're going along. They're a unit in many ways, and
Right.
it's
And we're
different.
not just there
but
as a support person. We're not just there to
Mhm.
bear witness to what they're going through. We do
Mhm.
those things, and those are important parts of it.
Mhm.
But we have our own path with that disease.
Yeah, you're having your own illness experience.
Yes.
We call that in our revolution the ripple effect,
Mhm.
because when someone gets an illness, it automatically, fans out to the
Mhm.
people that are closest to them, right?
Right.
And the spotlight needs to broaden and include those people.
Right.
And so, yeah, so everything you're saying is completely aligned with our ripple effect, is what we talk about it. So
Yeah.
it's going to be
Yeah, that's
great.
an excellent way to put it, because it does. And, yes,
Yeah.
all the attention goes to the patient, and
Mhm.
attention should go to the patient. I want to be
Yeah.
very clear about that.
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously are the kind of, primary, they're the
Mhm.
center of that ripple, and they
Mhm.
absolutely should get all of the support and attention that they need.
Mhm.
It's just that's not the end of the story.
No. And for some caregivers, it can feel almost like silencing,
Mhm.
like you just, in the different ways that you already described. So, and it can contribute to suffering for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. And I also wanted to know, it's interesting you say in the waiting room, because our revolution is called the waiting room revolution.
Yes.
And it's both, physically, when people are in the waiting room, it's such a power imbalance. You just feel
Mhm.
like totally vulnerable to, just waiting in there, and waiting for what and for who. And
Yeah.
um,
And for
metaphorically,
how long? Who knows?
yeah, yeah. And what's my life going to be like after I get whatever I'm waiting for?
Mhm.
um, and metaphorically, people always feeling like, they're waiting
Yeah.
for the healthcare provider to invite them to know more or to answer questions or whatever. So that's why we
Mhm.
called it Waiting Room Revolution.
Yeah.
When your husband was first diagnosed, or the second diagnosis, um, I'm assuming there was a period of time where there were symptoms and you were waiting to find out what it was, or there might have been investigations to see if it had gone anywhere else in the body.
Right.
What was it like in that twilight zone before you actually had the information that allowed you to land with a plan?
Mhm. It's torture. I think I've written about this before at some point. Like, I know people have limited control over their scheduling or whatnot, but like whatever control you do have or whatever you can do to improve that, please do, because that is torturous.
Mm.
Because your mind goes in all the directions because you don't know which one will be yours. And so you consider all of them, and you don't
Mhm.
know, from this will be just a blip
Mhm.
to this will end his life to everything in
Mhm.
between. You
Mhm.
don't know which one you're going to get. So it's brutal to just have to sit and wait and not be able to do anything. You don't
Mhm.
really want to Google too much because you don't want to scare yourself, and you don't know which thing to Google
Mhm.
anyway.
Mhm.
And you just have to just I wish I had better words to articulate it, but
Mhm.
it's just agonizing to just
Mhm.
sit in waiting
Yeah.
and have no power or control to do anything about it, to
Yeah.
get there any faster, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so powerful what you're saying because your husband is a doctor. And as you know, people who are connected to the system probably have more information. And yet you still had that experience. And so, in many ways, our revolution was trying to activate patients and families so they could get some of that power back. I guess by asking questions, inviting themselves to the conversation, even if it's not being offered. That information is there, but it's hidden. For example, people think palliative care is only for end of life. And they think this revolution is about death and dying, but this isn't about dying well. We think the whole illness experience needs to be revamped. And so that's our mission in a nutshell. And I'm curious, does that resonate with you and your mission?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that the so many thoughts. It's hard to pick the first one I want to talk
Sorry.
about. So, for one thing, to go back to the palliative care thing of everybody thinks it's dying. That is, I'm not even in palliative care. I'm not even in medicine. And that is one of my biggest pet peeves because I think that it's holding us back. I think it could be so wonderful if everyone took the principles of palliative care and that was just how care is provided. You know, the details may differ by specialty or condition or situation or what have you, but these underlying principles of, you know, informing people, figuring out what they're comfortable with, figuring out what their goals are for their care and their life, figuring, you know, instead of just here's some biology, we're going to do some stuff on it and then the person's going to leave. You know, that's not care. That may be medicine, but that's not care. And I think most people go into medicine, not all, sure, but most, I think, go into medicine because they want to help people and provide care. And then that humanity and big picture is trained out of them.
Yeah.
They're taught to just focus on disease and not people. And then, you know, because that's the system, it does what it's designed to do, then the healthcare system becomes about disease and not people. So, oh, this is soapbox. I could go on forever about that.
I think we should go get a bottle of wine.
Yes.
And crack it open. No. Yeah, palliative care is, of course, we talk about it all the time, but you're right. It's really just good care.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It actually should never have to be labeled. It is it's a philosophy of care that should pepper all
the
care.
specialties.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I get myself in trouble as a palliative care doctor because I often say, we've built ourselves a specialty, you know, at a time that maybe it was needed, but now we have to build ourselves out of a specialty because we've really you know, enabled the rest of the healthcare system to say, I don't do it. It's a specialty. So we're part of the problem, to be honest with you. We're part of the solution and part of the problem at the same time.
What we realized is, you know, we couldn't just hope for the luck that you could get a good doctor or that your doctor had some experience with palliative care or some knowledge about that. We had actually been educating, not just us, but millions of people, educating clinicians, healthcare providers for years without moving the needle. So our pivot with the waiting revolution was to take that education, those concepts, deconstruct palliative care into actionable steps for patients and families, and really try to, I guess, guide or show them how to leach out ways to get the best care possible. It really is about the best care possible, or a person-centered care.
Right. And they all know what it is because none of us get it. And then we have that. We all know that feeling of when you go to the doctor and it's so, you know, negative of an experience in various ways. It's demeaning or demoralizing or just discouraging or just something about it is kind of like, oh man, I really hoped for more from that appointment. But like we all know that this is the better approach, but it's not what's being built into the system.
We're trying to give patients and families the skills to get what they need out of the healthcare system, without labeling it, but to be, as Cian said, respectfully activated or assertive, or, you know, people don't like empowered, but, you know, to come forward, and you have the right. It is your life,
right?
You know, it's your future. You know, don't worry about what the doctor says. Don't worry about being a good patient. You can be respectfully assertive, and you know, and that's your right. So that's what we're trying to do, is basically cause a tidal wave of a new type of patient and family to rush the healthcare system so that there's no choice. They're just going to have to change. They're going to have to get used to people coming and saying, I'd like to know more about the storyline of this illness and how it's going to unfold. What chapter am I in? How much time might I have? What are the big decision points I'm going to have to make, or the milestones? And it's not going to be acceptable for doctors to say, I'm sorry, I have no crystal ball. We have lots of information to share with patients and families. It's our discomfort that prevents us because we think we're going to make people sad or hopeless.
Right. This goes back again, like, of course, you know, being married to a doctor and we've been together since college. So I saw the whole medical training journey. They're they're not taught how to deal with emotions. And in fact, they're
Mm.
taught to suppress emotion
Mhm.
and put it in a little box and deal with it later or maybe never.
Mhm.
And, just be this affectless
Mhm.
robot because
Mhm.
that's what you have to do to be able to see what you're going to see and do what you're going to do. I get the intention behind that, but I do not think it's effective.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of data to support that this may not
Mm.
be effective because they're not robots, they're humans. And doing
Mhm.
that takes the humanity away from the doctors and it takes the humanity, that they might give to their patients. And then
Mhm.
nobody's being treated like a
Mhm.
human. And you can't deny human nature just because you would like to,
Yeah, yeah, that's so
So you
true.
need to learn to handle that. Yes, if you go into this field, you may see some sadness, some grief, some despair. You may see all these
Mhm.
negative things, but that
Mhm.
doesn't have to be a deal breaker. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
something that, you have to turn off your humanity in order to see. Let's all just be a little more emotionally intelligent and,
Mhm.
self-aware to be able to process those things and work through them and use them to provide better care because we're providing care human to human.
Because that's often the antidote to physicians feeling helpless
Yes, they
when
want
they
to
are.
help people.
Yeah, and help can come in the form of just being present, being
Yeah.
human, using your emotional intelligence. It can be the best medicine, but if we wash it out of people because of professional boundaries, et cetera, um, we end up rendering not only a disservice to the patient and families, but to the clinicians as well, because they just
Yeah.
feel they have nothing to offer, but they
Right.
do.
There's
They have
nothing they can do
themselves.
because the
Yeah.
biology is as far as it is. And I think patients and families want that change.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a new age, right? I do not
Mhm.
think it's professional to not, to just stifle your emotions and tell me I don't have a crystal ball. I don't
Mhm.
think that's acceptable, let alone
Mhm.
professional. I
Mhm.
think it's professional to understand where I might be coming from as I'm sitting in that room listening to
Mhm.
what you're saying
Mhm.
and helping me work through that, not in like a therapy way if you're not a
Yeah.
psychologist, but just like here's the information you need, here's the information I have, here are the resources that are available to you. I know this must be so hard for you and your
Mhm.
family. Here's
Mhm.
what you can do. You don't have to be the one providing all of the help, but
Yeah.
you're there in the moment when they're discovering these things and when they're being treated and
Mhm.
whatnot. And so you are perfectly placed to share with them how they can continue to help themselves and
Mhm.
where else they can find help. And none of that's happening.
Or if it does happen, it happens way too far into the illness journey.
Yeah.
And so people avoid opening those cans of worms because you know what? You're going to just derail my clinic. And so people
Right.
say, it takes too long. Well, yes, it does take too long if you've waited too long actually to do
Yeah.
that work.
Right. Yeah. I will tell you, I mean, the one of the interactions I've had that has been the most meaningful
Mhm.
was, and I wrote a piece about this recently
Mhm.
in the chest, in the journal chest,
Mhm.
uh, was with an ICU nurse named Roger. All he did, he asked me, he was the nurse for my husband after his cardiac arrest. He was one of the
Mhm.
nurses, and he asked me how I was doing.
Mhm.
And in my entire time as a co-patient and co-survivor, so it's,
Mhm.
spanning a decade,
Mhm.
no one had ever asked me that question before from the healthcare system. Not one person. He
Mhm.
was the first one 10
Mhm.
years in and the only one still to this day.
Mhm.
So that's all it took.
Mhm.
Hey, how are
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
He sees that this, could be hard. He said, "You're doing a great job."
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm here. I am preaching about it everywhere now, 3 years
Mhm.
later. I mean, that is all it takes. It does not have to, I mean, not always. Sure. There's situations that are more complicated, but that can
Mhm.
be all it takes. It's not
Mhm.
like this is, demanding a lot of time or resources or money or
Mhm.
effort. It's
Mhm.
just, hey, remember how to be a human.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's being seen, right? And being
Mhm.
Yeah.
recognized and acknowledged that
Yep.
this is hard and we're going to try our best, but medicine can't do everything, but we're going to do all we can. But
Mhm.
there's
Right.
still parts that are going to be hard. So,
Yeah. And I
you know,
don't think patients expect well, I don't know, maybe some do, but I think for the most part, you don't expect medicine to do everything. People understand there's limitations, by the time you've tried everything and it hasn't worked,
Mhm.
we're
Yeah.
not, that's not a surprise to us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
They've already thought of that in one of their million scenarios.
exactly,
Yeah,
Mhm.
they've already
exactly.
gone down that road.
So, Kristen, we've been talking a lot about the waiting room revolution, but would love to hear more about the projects and work you are leading.
Gosh, there's so much that I, am dreaming of too that hasn't happened yet. But so far, what's kind of out in the world is a lot of writing. I'm working on writing. I have published a few pieces in the Journal of Cardiac Failure and in Chest. And then, I'm starting slowly getting around to, publishing things on my own blog and just talking about, the experience as a co-patient,
Mhm.
co-survivor, family member. So that's there. We have a podcast now called Knock Knock Hi with the Glaucomfleckens. It's
Mhm.
a medical comedy podcast. So it's a nice light listen, but we do get into, some interesting and sometimes serious topics.
Mhm.
But there's also a ton of, jokes and stories and games and things that really our mission with the podcast and our mission with all of our work with our company is to bring the humanity back to medicine, remind people that doctors are humans, remind doctors that patients are humans, and just try to get everybody back on the same page of dealing with each other, human to human, and meeting your human needs, taking care of yourself, taking care of others. So we have that out there. And then there's, of course, my husband produces a bunch of videos that are kind of about that too, ultimately, right? He pokes fun at the different dynamics in healthcare and, insurance companies and all sorts of things. And that is all kind of towards that same goal. And then we have a lot of projects in the works in various stages, but my big dream someday, I would love to many things, but one of it is I would love to be able to have a framework for clinicians to be able to, better understand the patient and family experience and how to make it good, what makes it go wrong, what makes it go right. Just things to that effect, using my personal experience, but also my professional experience and why you should care. I think a lot of people might just kind of write it off as, oh, well, that's the mushy feeling stuff for, psychologists or psychiatrists to deal with. And that's not my job. But I would argue if you're a human, it is your job just on a human level. And as a clinician, we know I come from, I studied cognitive neuroscience and social psychology and also psychophysiology in there. So I was very interested in how the brain and the body affect one another. And we know that the Surgeon General just released an advisory about loneliness as a good example that, these things that we have thought of in the past as mushy feeling stuff actually have a biological effect on our bodies. It's detrimental to our health. So in every way, I think it is, it is your job as a clinician to be thinking about these things. I went off on all sorts of tangents, but
I think probably Sienna and I are both thinking the same thing, like how unbelievably aligned your work is with the work that we've been doing, which is similar in terms of peeling back the curtains and helping patients and families understand what they need to know to have a fighting chance to feel like a human through their illness experience.
Right.
And this mind-body experience we see in, of course, palliative care all the time, where symptoms are often amplified because of fears and anxiety. And, I get called for pain or nausea or insomnia, and you dig underneath all of it. And it's usually because they have a major burning question or a myth or fake news about something. Yeah. So no doubt. You and your husband have a certain style about you, a certain vibe. So first of all, I can't believe two really funny people get along so well, because I think normally you see like one person is really outgoing and the other one is serious, and they make such a good couple but you're both hysterical.
Thank you.
So another part of our revolution is talking about your personal style and how, there's the biology of the illness, and the illness is going to
Mhm.
be its thing, and there's science and all of that. But then there is the person, and each person is going to have a different illness experience based on who they are, their coping mechanisms, for better or worse,
Mhm.
how they've dealt with difficult problems before. Like, there's a lot you can know about yourself to predict if and when you get a serious illness, how
Yeah.
you're going to, handle it, how you're going to move through it. So,
Right.
what other ways about you and your husband allowed you to move through these difficult times other than humor? Was that a way you got through it in those 10 years? Or did you guys become funny after?
I think we've been funny. I don't know. No, humor definitely is a coping mechanism for us. We started out already with, pretty irreverent kind of humor. And then as we've been through all these difficult experiences,
Mhm.
we've learned that, dark humor can help you process. It's
Yeah.
actually therapeutic
Mhm.
sometimes.
Mhm.
And so, we just poke fun at it. And now, even our
Mhm.
kids they've picked it up too my daughter just had I won't go into all the details, but she was getting her braces off and it turned into an emergency room visit.
Mhm.
And that by the time she's all okay, everything was fine. And I
Mhm.
mean, it was really scary and hard for her,
Mhm.
but then at the end of it, she was cracking a joke about it. And I
Mhm.
said, you know, it, interesting that you would crack a joke about it. And she said, it's a family tradition. So
Yeah. A chip off the old block.
Yeah.
yeah, so it is a way to process it and to feel like you have some amount of control, or at least the
Mhm.
illusion of control over
Mhm.
some, the narrative of this thing that's happening in
Mhm.
your life. Um, I won't speak for my husband, I guess, without him here, but I know for me, information is very helpful. I need language and
Mhm.
information and data, and as long as it's accurate, I can't get enough of it.
Mhm.
Um, that's what helps me kind of wrap my mind around it. And
Mhm.
otherwise my mind will just spin with all of it.
Mhm.
And so I need something to attach that
Mhm.
to let it be at peace. And so that's what I always look for, is like, why did this
Mhm.
happen? Why did that happen? How on
Mhm.
earth did this happen?
Mhm.
It was so unlikely. Was there something in our lives that made it more likely? Just
Mhm.
go off
Mhm.
on all the different
Mhm.
possibilities and try to learn as much as I can about it. That helps
Mhm.
helps me. And then also advocacy, because I just I don't know, for whatever reason, don't I can't live with the idea of just letting a bad thing happen and then that's
Mhm.
it, right? Like
Mhm.
I feel like it helps me move forward if I take the
Mhm.
bad thing that
Mhm.
happened and turn it into good. Kind of in the
Mhm.
same way that humor allows you to take back a piece of control over the
Mhm.
situation. I think advocacy
Mhm.
does the same.
We're trying to encourage people to go to become comfortable with bringing that stuff forward when
Mm.
they're initially diagnosed or early in the illness journey. Like, doctor, I have to tell you a couple things about me, um,
Mhm.
so that we can figure out how to do this together. One of them is that I need information. I am a
Yeah.
super seeker and I need concrete information. I'm going to
Right.
feel so floating in an abyss
Mhm.
unless you anchor me with information, like the kind of stuff that you said.
Yes.
We're trying to get people to do like not a self-assessment, but really know themselves and know what they need and bring that
Yeah.
forward to their appointments so that,
Yeah.
you know, the doctor has their marching orders and it's
Right.
not unclear to them, like, what does this person need, you know?
Yeah. I think
So
sometimes doctors too, I think that would be helpful to the doctor, because
it is.
sometimes they think, well, I can give this information to them. I don't know
That's
if they're
right.
the type of person that wants
Yeah,
information or if they want to avoid the information. And so I'm
right.
just going to do nothing because I don't want to do the wrong thing. So
Exactly. And then
yeah,
we
I think that's
have
a great idea.
a cone of silence. The patients sit
Right.
there passive, waiting to be invited, and the doctor's waiting for the person to declare themselves. Neither
Yeah.
one is doing it. And then we have, a vortex.
Right.
So we want people to come forward and just say, this is my style, doctor. This is what I need. And most doctors have told us when we've gone over this, they say, you know what, that would be so helpful.
Yeah.
That would be so helpful. It makes me feel so less worried about just
Right.
speaking frankly and openly without like a ton of sugar, you know?
Right.
So anyway, there's so many
Yeah.
things we can do that are so small, but so huge, huh?
Right. Yes. I love that idea. Communication is so messy and hard, even on a good day. And when
Yeah.
dealing with something like a huge diagnosis, I think that would, be beneficial for everybody.
Kristen, you and your husband, Dr. Glaucomflecken, have such an amazing story and platform, and you have such a clear mission to improve the patient and family experience. It's similar to ours, and you've had so much success and things coming at you. I'm curious, how do you see your platform growing? I mean, do you have like a 5-year plan or something, or are you letting things happen naturally?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I haven't really thought of it in that way before. I think we're just sort of naturally attracted to the spark when we see it, right? When we recognize what it is we're
Mm-hmm.
doing in somebody else in some way, they have their
Mm-hmm.
take on it and we have ours, but we
Mm-hmm.
recognize that overlap.
Mm-hmm.
We follow that and we try to find good people. We have an excellent production team on our podcast who really believes in our vision and in helping us make that happen. I think we say no to a lot of things because sure, they would be a financial opportunity, but they don't really align with what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, we don't go those directions. We want to save our energy for the directions that we would like to go. Um, so many people, individual people along the way that we've met, mostly through Twitter, that, I either just kind of keep an eye on their work and keep up with what they're doing because it informs my work, or, that we have actually talked to or met and sometimes even met in person. Benjamin Abella comes to mind. He's been a huge ally for me. I think he knows everyone on the planet and he is very happy to connect people to each other. And so he's been very helpful. He's been kind of a mentor to me as well as I've been learning the cardiac arrest space. Rana Oddish has been so helpful to me because, she didn't even know she was, but I was reading her book, 6 months after the cardiac arrest. And she's an intensive care physician, but also an intensive care patient. And she writes about that experience and kind of examines it from all sides, and a lot of what I experienced within the healthcare system that further traumatized me. She writes about, even though, I was a family member, she was a patient, we didn't know each other, we're on different sides of the country. I mean, but it was all the same. And it felt so validating to know, like, okay, I'm not making this up. I'm not being overly sensitive. These issues do exist and they are a problem. To see them written out by somebody else, that has been very helpful. And I mean, on and on and on, many, many people as individuals have been helpful to us along the way. And I think we're still in that phase of being introduced to, people that have similar missions.
Well, we're almost out of time, and we often end our interviews with this question of what advice do you have for patients and co-patients or co-survivors from all that you've experienced?
Yeah, one thing that I tell people a lot when they send me questions, this is very similar to what you're saying, is just don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. If you have a question, ask it. If you don't understand the response, say so. It's not, I feel like everybody's so cognizant of, the doctors just have so little time and you can feel the rush when they walk into the room, and I think it's okay. It is your life and your illness, and these are high stakes. And so don't be afraid to use your voice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
Love it.
Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. This is so much fun. I could go on for hours.
Yeah, you are delightful.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can visit our website, waitingroomrevolution.com, to learn more about our movement and how you can join it. The podcast is produced by myself, Kayla McMillan, Valerie Bishop, Shilpa Jyothi Kumar, and Maggie Sivak. Our theme music is Maypole by Ketsa.